Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a real geographical paradox, Europe's incredible surviving microstate, Liechtenstein. You know, when we think about global influence, we usually picture massive superpowers, right? Sprawling continents, populations in the hundreds of millions. But what if I told you that one of the absolute most successful, resilient, and frankly wealthiest states in the modern world defies every single one of those expectations? We're unpacking the totally unique story of Liechtenstein. People often call it a fairy tale country or a millionaire's playground, but honestly, the reality is way more complex and way more engineered than just some simple fairy tale.
So how exactly did this tiny, quasi-absolute monarchy transform from an isolated agrarian valley into one of the wealthiest nations on Earth? I mean, think about that number for a second. 39,000 people. That is literally the size of a modest university campus, or maybe a small suburb. Yet this population holds sovereign state status, they participate actively at the United Nations, and they exert a massive gravitational pull in global finance and specialized manufacturing. To figure out how they actually pulled this off, we really have to look past those surface-level assumptions.
To put this incredibly small scale into perspective, the entire country is just 160 square kilometers. It's nestled precariously, and I mean precariously, between Switzerland and Austria, right in the Rhine Valley. To visualize that, it's just 24 kilometers long and 12 kilometers wide. And because it's sitting in the highly mountainous Rhaetian Alps, only about 30% of the country is even usable as farmland. Historically speaking, having a tiny footprint with rocky terrain and basically no agricultural space, that was a guaranteed recipe for poverty, or, just being absorbed by a larger empire. But as we'll see, Liechtenstein somehow used its geography to its ultimate advantage.
Section 1. Surviving as a microstate. The mere fact that Liechtenstein even exists today on the map of Europe is a staggering historical anomaly. Their whole history is literally a masterclass in survival. It all started way back with the purchase of the Vaduz territory in 1342. Fast forward a bit, and in 1719, the Holy Roman Emperor elevated the combined territories of Vaduz and Schellenberg to a full principality. Now, while the rest of Europe was dissolving old borders, watching the Holy Roman Empire fall, and being totally reshaped by the Napoleonic Wars, Liechtenstein just kept a low profile. They gradually modernized, getting their first constitutional monarchy in 1862 and then completely restructuring their government in 1921 to lock in their modern legal framework. Amazingly, they were never on the losing side of a major war, and they never had their sovereignty snatched away.
Now, what's truly brilliant here is their massive strategic pivot during World War I. Before the First World War, Liechtenstein heavily relied on the Austro-Hungarian Empire for diplomatic and administrative protection. But when that empire totally collapsed at the end of the war in 1918, Liechtenstein suddenly found itself completely, terrifyingly isolated. So, instead of panicking, or just letting themselves be absorbed by Germany or Austria, they made this brilliant move. They shifted their diplomatic reliance strictly over to neutral Switzerland. It turns out surviving massive empire collapses is a lot easier when you just quietly switch to the most stable, neutral friend in your neighborhood. This wasn't just foreign policy, it was absolute sheer survival.
And this crucial alliance integrated them into a massive economic area. By signing a comprehensive customs union with Switzerland, Liechtenstein adopted the Swiss franc and basically outsourced parts of its border control and foreign diplomacy. Why does this matter? Well, it gave them free trade and movement into a market literally 500 times their own size, and they got all this without the heavy regulatory burden of being a full European Union member. They essentially secured extreme prosperity while remaining fiercely independent.
Section 2. The power of the prince. Okay, next up, we really need to examine the incredibly unique political structure that rules over this tiny, wealthy territory. Because when we say principality, we aren't just talking about a ceremonial title for the tourism brochures. We're looking at a fascinating juxtaposition here. On one side, you have this modern democratic foundation, regular elections, political parties, a parliament with 25 seats representing those 39,000 citizens. But on the exact opposite side, you have the current monarch, Prince Hans Adam II, and his family. And let me tell you, they don't just cut ribbons. They are the active executive head of state.
Unlike most European figureheads, the Prince of Liechtenstein has real, tangible power. We're talking about the right to actually veto legislation passed by the parliament, the power to dissolve that parliament entirely, and significant authority when it comes to appointing judges. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, how on earth does a system like this survive in the 21st century? The answer is wild. The voters actually reinforced it. Yeah, in recent referendums, including a really major one back in 2003, the citizens literally voted to maintain and even clarify these strong princely powers. It creates this extraordinary, highly functioning hybrid of a modern democracy and a quasi-absolute monarchy that, somehow, yields tremendous political stability.
Section 3. A tiny economic powerhouse. So how exactly did this super-traditional political structure oversee the transformation from poor farmland into the so-called millionaire's playground? Well, it actually highlights a huge misconception. When most people hear Liechtenstein, they immediately picture secretive bank vaults. But in reality, its GDP is heavily supported by a highly advanced industrial sector. In fact, right after World War II, it was rapid industrialization, not just the banks, that actually pulled the population out of poverty. They built a dual-pillar economy that is remarkably resilient to global economic shocks. Look beyond the banking secrecy, and you'll find that local entrepreneurs actually built global manufacturing giants right in this tiny valley. Companies like Hilti in construction technology, or EMS Chemi. They produce everything from automotive parts to high-caliber precision tools. The big takeaway here? Their success isn't an accident. It's a combination of a highly skilled workforce, a super strong Swiss currency that shields them from inflation, and incredibly business-friendly tax regulations. They aren't just moving other people's money around. They are physically creating highly specialized, globally exported goods.
Section 4. Culture, Castles, and Conservation.
But, it's not all bank vaults and high-tech factories. We absolutely have to talk about their natural heritage, because without understanding their culture, you really can't grasp their fiercely guarded independence. Get this, a staggering 32.7% of the country's total area is designated as protected forest. In an era where concrete development usually overrides nature, Liechtenstein takes its conservation incredibly seriously. And this isn't just some modern, trendy green initiative. This environmental effort actually dates all the way back to 1483. They realized centuries ago that preserving the alpine forests right above their settlements was absolutely critical to preventing avalanches and soil erosion. Today, it remains a vital sanctuary for endangered alpine flora and fauna.
And those 39,000 residents, they maintain a fierce local pride. They speak a totally distinct Alemannic German dialect, which deeply ties them to their historical roots. Imagine your daily life taking place right under the shadow of a dramatic 13th century fortress like Vaduz Castle. And get this, it's still the actual private residence of the princely family today. This unique blend of spectacular mountain views, ancient folklore, and a super tight-knit community spirit is exactly why they've completely resisted being assimilated into larger neighboring countries. They know exactly who they are.
Section 5. Navigating a Changing World.
As we look to the future, the global landscape is shifting faster than ever before, and microstates, well, they're right in the crosshairs. The traditional pillars of Liechtenstein's economy are under some pretty severe threat right now. For decades, low taxes and extremely strict banking secrecy were the ultimate draw for global wealth. But today, massive organizations like the OECD and the European Union are demanding absolute transparency and the automatic exchange of tax data. No more secrets. On top of all that, just being an alpine nation means the looming threat of climate change puts their pristine environment and their tourism sectors at very immediate risk.
It's an immense tightrope walk, as these international organizations apply massive, unrelenting pressure. The financial industry, the exact industry that fueled decades of unprecedented growth and gave them a GDP per capita that dwarfs most of the world, must rapidly adapt. Actually, scratch that. It's more like they have to completely pivot. They need to shift from a business model based on secrecy to one based on top-tier, totally transparent financial services. If they don't, well, they risk devastating political retaliation and basically losing their access to the entire global market. All of which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question. We've seen how they brilliantly maneuvered through collapsing empires, the total devastation of 2 world wars, and the Industrial Revolution. But can this medieval microstate actually continue its incredible streak of survival into the totally transparent, hyper-regulated digital era of the 21st century? Will the absolute power of the prince and their highly unique economic agility be enough to safeguard their independence? It is a fascinating question to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning how the world's smallest players so often end up making the absolute biggest impact.